"Don't you dare move," she snapped, voice taut as wire. He sneered, flicking sweat off his brow. "You think you can threaten me with that?" The room was tight with the sour stench of fear and cheap aftershave. Behind him, someone knocked into a case of empty bottles, glass chiming on stone. The glare of the overhead bulb bled into her eyes, but she didn't blink. "One more word and I'll give the DA every page," she said through clenched teeth. His mouth curled. "You won't, you don't have it in you." Her grip didn't falter on the stack of journals. The ledger's cracked spine pressed grooves into her palm. "Watch me," she shot back, chest heaving, the night air pushing in through a busted window beside them. His knuckles went white on the table. "You'll bury a family's reputation to save yourself." She drew a slow breath, jaw locked. "You buried it 40 years ago." Outside, tires crunched in the gravel. Bootsteps hammered up the stairs, echoing through the pipes. "Don't do this," he whispered, panic fizzing behind the words. She tightened her grip and met his eyes, the overhead bulb painting shadows like scars. "After everything, you expect mercy." For a moment, no one breathed. How had it come to this? To understand, you'd have to go back before the lights, before the knots tightened, when none of them believed the cabin or the name meant more than a bad joke. No one noticed the station until the sun dropped, painting red stripes through dust-caked windows. The Texaco sign, long dead, hung crooked above the sagging awning. Margaret hauled her husband's battered duffel past the weeds choking the steps. "Careful with the lantern," John muttered, favoring his left knee. "That porch'll give." Margaret exhaled, white hair shining under the last pink light. The gas station had a stench of mouse droppings and old rubber. Their cardboard box, what was left after 2 storage units and 3 borrowed garages, sat wedged between a rusty freezer and a plywood bench. 2 days, she checked the message on her phone again, thumb trembling. "Auction in 48 hours, and if we don't sign, our own lawyer, buys it for $1." John didn't answer. He coughed, thumbed the rim of his cap, and shut his eyes against the migraine raging behind them. $33 left, all of it in crumpled bills hidden in Margaret's bra. They'd been discarded like empty oil cans since their only son stopped answering calls 5 months ago. His anger, their pride, and finally, the city council's decree that the substandard home on Route 27 was no place for vulnerable seniors. Banished. Some folks called it emergency relocation. A sedan's headlights swept the far end of the parking lot. Margaret flinched. John pressed her shoulder. "It's just someone turning around, Mags." She didn't answer. She fished through the mailbox under the ashtray, only the legal letter, grimy but official, with the old family crest. Next to it was a tiny envelope, yellowed, wedged behind a cracked receipt. She frowned, pulling it free. From her late father-in-law, the neat ink, "If you ever reach the end, use this key," beneath the foundation. John watched, his own voice gone softer. "I never saw that before. What's it mean?" Margaret turned the key over in shaking fingers. It was heavy, older than her wedding band, attached to a faded tag. "Cabin, North Field. Only one who needs it will know." A flicker of something, hope or warning, darted across John's face. "You seen that key before, Maggie?" She shook her head, mind spinning. The old property near Otsego, rumored to be cursed, worthless, a family humiliation. That place, they always said it was a joke. Why give it to us? John huffed, shrugging off his jacket. "Sometimes you dig through trash and find the only thing that can save you." Margaret ran a thumb over the crest, pulse stuttering. Who'd bury a key for a joke? If you've ever been left with nothing but a bad hand and found a hidden card anyway, keep listening. This one's for you. The highway out of Lordsburg cut north, slicing between red bluffs and borrowed time. Margaret braced an elbow against the window as John steered their ancient Impala through the dark, clipped by trucks barreling past. Rain started as a whisper, then a hard shuffle against the windshield. The radio only picked up static. Margaret traced the edges of the key under her sweater, the metal warm from her chest. "I'll drive," John offered, knuckles tight on the wheel. "You need sleep." She didn't. Every rattle of the car was a memory, nights spent waiting for letter carriers, a lifetime of small humiliations at bank counters and social services, city officials pretending they couldn't hear her tears. A sign for Otsego appeared, backlit by lightning. Behind them, the world they'd called home dwindled to a shrinking line of tail lights and stormlight. Margaret clutched the letter in her lap, reading again. "Why did your father leave us that nasty cabin? I thought he hated me after the wedding." John snorted. Dad hated everybody except his brother, maybe. "Nobody's been out there in 20 years, Maggie, except the lawyer. Remember how he wouldn't look you in the eye after the funeral?" She blinked, shifting. "You trust that man?" He grimaced, never did, something in the handshake, too soft, counting every finger. The Impala spat gravel as they turned onto the overgrown lane off County 47. Lightning laced the trees, black, thick-trunked, bristling up to the sagging gray sky. At the top of the lane, the cabin waited, a hunched log structure crouched in brambles, windows boarded and gutter sagging. The wind howled over the chimney as John squinted. "Let's get this over with, Mags." Margaret shouldered aside the warped front door, key fitting easily in the rusted lock. The air inside tasted like mold and mouse. Flashlight trembling, she circled the main room. "What a dump," John muttered. She frowned, spotting a trapdoor behind a shattered rack in the corner, a wine rack, heavy oak, caked in dust. The floorboards under it creaked in a strange rhythm as she pressed her foot to the edges. "Found something," she said, voice small. John shuffled over. "Trapdoor." Margaret nodded. Rain battered the roof as John lifted the rack, exposing cracked planks. Something clicked. Beneath one loose board was a false bottom, and inside, a stack of old, leather-bound journals bound by a silver clasp near an oilskin pouch. Margaret reached in, breath trapped in her throat. "Take the light, John," she whispered. He swung the beam over the journals. The top book, scratched but still embossed, was labeled Records, Winters, 1973–1994. Thunder rattled the window panes. Margaret stared at the journals, heart ricocheting. Below the pouch nestled rolled maps and yellowed paper. John squinted over her shoulder. Who the hell kept this here? She cracked open the first journal, hands trembling, and began to read. She had the uncanny feeling that the wind outside was holding its own breath. The living room felt bigger in the dark, each corner brimming with secrets, the muffled shriek of wind echoing through the warped beams. Margaret flipped through pages, words blurring in the flickering light. John steadied a lantern by her side. The journals were meticulous, columns of numbers, names, signatures. $93, $400, $371, $0, impossibly consistent, all in the same hand. Under each year, another header: acquisition, distribution, payee. Some names had lines crossed, others clustered under asset transfer out. Mid-book, a folded note fell onto Margaret's lap. She caught her breath, soft, nearly inaudible. Cursive, spidery. "Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, someone failed to bury the truth deep enough. They paid a lawyer to cover for them after my stroke. All records are here for the honest. Forgive me if you find nothing but dirt. J." Margaret's knuckles blanched. She heard John swallow. He knew, John whispered, or maybe accused. "Dad, he wrote this for us." Margaret read on. Her father-in-law's entries turned frantic after 1989, a marked change, funds missing. Lawyer insists on extra caution. Pressure mounting, family integrity at risk. She flipped further, detailed logs for cash routed through trusts, property churned from one charity to another. Names she recognized, council members, neighbors. One, in angry red ink, matched the lawyer's alias. "John, look," she thrust the page at him. "He altered the will, didn't he?" John's lips pressed thin. He paid him off for decades. Oh God, Maggie, is that why we lost everything? A low groan from somewhere in the walls froze them. Margaret's hand shook. At the bottom of the final journal, tucked inside the back cover, rested a torn photograph. The lawyer, grinning, shoulder to shoulder with Margaret's late brother-in-law, a massive check between them. "Get a picture of this," she whispered, shoving her phone at John. He fumbled with the light lantern illuminating his pale face as the camera snapped. The flash revealed something else. Set into the stones behind the wine rack, another compartment, half-hinged. John pried it open, more documents, stamped with an official seal and something metallic, a badge, dull with age, labeled forensic accountant. Margaret stared. He put everything down, but kept the badge for blackmail insurance. John's voice shook. "Dad, he thought we'd never find it, or maybe he hoped we would." Margaret shut the last journal. "We need help, someone who can see what's here." At that moment, thunder shook the rafters, but Margaret's mind was clearer than it had been in years. They left the cabin before dawn, the journals and maps bundled tight in the duffel. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the Impala's headlights. Margaret stared out at the empty fields, her fingers tight around the photo of the lawyer. At the diner just off Route 11, the windows trembled as a freight train passed. Over Formica counters, Margaret met the eyes of a woman she hadn't seen in 2 decades. Donna, the county clerk, older now, gray at the temples but sharp as ever. Donna's voice was brisk. "Jesus, Margaret Winters, if you're here, something's gone wrong." John explained in low, clipped sentences, his hand never leaving the duffel. Margaret drew out 2 journals, pressing them across the sticky table. "He's been laundering through the trust all these years. It's all in here. Numbers, dates, payoffs." Donna's eyes widened. The trust was never supposed to be more than a patch of woods. Margaret shot her a grim smile. "Who bought the woods, Donna?" She read a single entry, lips moving. This can't be legal. And here, oh, Margaret, that's the county's old payroll account, closed 3 years ago." John leaned forward. "And there's more names, some are dead, others are." Donna's voice dropped to a whisper. "You realize if this gets out, half the town council's cooked, and your lawyer friend's buying the place tomorrow." Margaret nodded, words thin. "The auction's 48 hours from now. If he claims the property, he buries all of this, again." Donna ran a palm over her forehead. "If this is legit, we'll need a forensic accountant and the district attorney. And Maggie, this evidence, it's dangerous." John grunted. "It's all we've got." Donna's hand trembled as she lifted her phone. "I'll call the DA's desk now, but Margaret, be careful who you trust." The clock on the diner wall ticked into the next hour, wound tight as the nerves in Margaret's chest. Outside, the night pressed closer, as if hiding secrets behind the glass. Margaret ducked into the rain-damp parking lot, duffel heavy on her shoulder, John close behind. Their breath steamed in the cold air. At the far end of the lot, a man in a dark suit leaned against a midnight blue Buick, lawyer's car, unmistakable. John's voice was pinched. "He's here." Margaret squared her shoulders. "One shot at this, let's make it count." The lawyer straightened, slow-footed and deliberate. "I see you made yourselves comfortable in the family's gift. How's the roof holding up?" Margaret kept her voice steady. "How did you know we'd be here?" He smirked, teeth bright. "I used to service that dump. Surprised it's still standing after all the winters." John bristled. "You never serviced anything but your own wallet." The lawyer's glare was quick, but his smile returned. "Let's keep it civil. You have something that doesn't belong to you." Margaret palmed the pouch tighter. "According to the original will, or at least the copy you didn't burn, we do." He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "I strongly suggest you turn over whatever you found. Some things are better left buried." John stood firm. "Seems to me that's what you're good at, burying things." The lawyer's hands wandered into his pockets. Your family's reputation won't survive another scandal, neither will you. Margaret only stared, the rain beginning anew, streaking windows and pooling at her feet. But inside her jacket, the journals pressed like a promise, cool and undeniable. She took John's hand. Come on, we have an appointment with the DA. The lawyer's eyes narrowed, sharp and feral. You'll regret this, I guarantee it. Margaret turned away, head high. The stakes had changed. The DA's office was 3 floors up in a tan, municipal building that hummed with fluorescent lights and secrets. Margaret's knuckles were white on the plastic duffel strap as she and John sat across from Assistant District Attorney Bate Chambers. Bates' shirt was rumpled, coffee stain on the cuff, but her eyes were unsparing as they swept over the journals, maps, and badge. There's enough here to sink a small town, or at least its slimiest lawyer, Bates said, dry as old toast. But laundering like this, I'll need the full scope. You sure you want to take it this far? John nodded. Our backs are already to the wall. Margaret locked eyes with Bates. We lost everything. You think we care about cosmetics? Bates' mouth curved. There'll be headlines, maybe jail time for companions. You ready for that? Margaret's reply was a whisper, just fix this. Bates scanned one ledger, double-checking figures, and finally whistled. He cleaned cash through property swaps, fake charities, shell companies, even a foundation for your late grandfather, decorated war vet. His name, been plastered on hundreds of checks. Margaret bristled. He used him, used us. Bates' fingers wrapped the table. You bring this to auction tomorrow, he's out, we'll freeze the trust, and with a DA present, anyone bidding will know the place is dirty. Margaret exchanged looks with John. John asked, and our name? Bates pursed her lips. If you work with us, I can leak enough evidence to kill the sale, then declare the estate forfeited in a civil asset seizure. All legal, above board. Margaret managed a thin smile. Let's do it. Bates offered a final warning. It gets ugly before it gets clean. Are you sure? Margaret nodded, voice shaking. I'm sure. As they left the building, the sun was already low, bruising the sky above the courthouse. Dawn crawled over Otsiego's Main Street as Margaret and John drove to the auction, their only suitcases bulging with secrets. Thunderheads hovered, casting the world in a pale, coppery glow. People were already gathered on courthouse steps. The sheriff, clipboard in hand, called for bidders. In the shadow of the old bell tower, the lawyer waited. His suit was sharper than yesterday, his smile cut from tin. Margaret walked straight up to him, every head turning as she held out the pouch. Recognize this. He glanced at the journals and sneered. Junk from the woods means nothing. She pressed onward. I know the trusts are fake. I have transaction logs, land deeds, even your badge. His smile faltered. You're bluffing. Margaret tossed the badge onto the table with a clatter, voice rising. Why don't you tell the sheriff where the money went then? The lawyer hesitated, sweat threading under his hairline. From the courthouse steps, Bate Chambers approached, a sheaf of papers in hand. Are we interrupting? She called, voice bright. The crowd grew restless. Bate addressed the assembly. This auction is postponed, pending investigation into property fraud and laundering connected to these journals. The lawyer tried to speak. Margaret cut him off. You think you can threaten me with that, she said, words sharp as broken glass. He spat. You won't go through with it, not with your family name at stake. Margaret held his gaze, the weight of decades behind her. You buried the name, not me. He opened his mouth, but outside, the wailing of sirens rolled down the street. Police surged up the steps, engines idling and uniforms flashing. A detective with an urgent frown strode directly to Bate. Margaret tightened her grip on the journals, jaw aching from the strain. I warned you, this is the only way it ends. Bate signaled the detective. Here's the evidence, complete, timestamped, notarized. The lawyer bolted. but the officers intercepted him before he hit the bottom stair. Gasps went up among the onlookers. The sheriff's clipboard clattered to the stone. Margaret stepped back, cold wind snatching at her hair. John placed a gentle hand at her waist, grounding her. The lawyer twisted, yelling, "You ruined everything for what? You think this town will thank you?" Margaret's reply was low but carried, "Not for thanks, for peace." As the lawyer was led away, Bate leaned close. "There's enough here to charge the whole ring." Margaret exhaled, pulse echoing in her ears. Their story, buried by design, had risen to crack open the foundations. The crowd began to murmur, some faces ashamed, others grateful. Margaret watched as justice moved like a cold front, inevitable, flattening every old secret into daylight. Bank accounts were seized within the week. The law firm shuttered its doors. Those entangled in the fraud lost seats, pensions, even marriages. An obituary in the local paper simply read, "For services no longer needed." Donna visited with buttered bread and a look that said, "Sorry wasn't enough." John spent his mornings patching the roof at the cabin, now free of any claims but the truth. Margaret walked the land at dawn with a notepad, sketching out what would become the veterans' retreat, a place for men and women forgotten by the world but not forgotten by each other. The county insisted on an unveiling, brass plaque and all, for Margaret's war hero grandfather. Margaret invited every soul who'd ever been run out or run over. On the first day, sun spilling over the meadow, Margaret gazed out over the grass. Her pain, once a boulder on her back, became a cornerstone. Justice arrived in the end, but not as spite, more like restoration. The cabin was never a joke, it was a test. If you've ever been written off or sent to the margins, remember, some things can be repaired and some wrongs are bigger than any one name. This time, Margaret chose to follow the path hidden beneath the foundation. And sometimes, if you keep going, through every storm and every empty room, the ground will shift beneath you and reveal a place worth building on. Margaret wandered to the edge of the north field on a morning gilded with hope, dew catching the new fencing posts. Everything smelled impossibly clean, even after decades of rot and shame. John hammered the last shingle on the cabin roof, pausing to wave. Somewhere beyond the orchard, she could hear laughter echoing, voices of volunteers, neighbors, people she'd thought lost to the old stories. She touched the brass plaque, fresh from the unveiling, running her fingers over her grandfather's name. The county had sent cameras, microphones, a mayor in a new suit. The photos appeared online before she'd even made it back inside, the cabin no longer labeled haunted or infamous but restored. She supposed it made a better headline. Beside her, John studied a list. 15 signed up for the first session already. Veterans Registry sent an old friend, Hank Linwood. He said he slept in his truck last October, never thought we'd see the day. A warmth bloomed below Margaret's ribs. Every bed's made, John, hot water runs, the world didn't end, did it? He grinned, rubbing the back of his neck. Ended for some, began for us. The grounds bustled, Donna and her partner patching a garden fence, Bate Chambers bringing city kids to repaint the kitchen, Donna's dog barking at birds. It was laughter and hammers, not secrets and threats, that filled the hills now. Margaret stepped inside, sunstriping the worn boards, the smell of fresh bread from the oven. On the table, the ledgers and journals were boxed and marked for evidence. The DA's office would hang onto them, but not as weapons. For the record, Bate had said, packing the box. And for the healing, history doesn't stay buried forever. Her own phone chimed. Her son's number 5 rings, then his voice, timid as a new shoot. "Mom, they're saying did you really do it? Did you win?" She pressed the phone to her cheek, closing her eyes. "No one wins, Tom, not in the way you mean. We cleaned out the wounds, that's all. Can you come home?" There was a long pause. In the silence, Margaret saw a boy with grass stains and skinned knees, a teenager who'd once helped her sort mail in the station lobby. "I want to. I'm sorry I ran." She gripped the counter, tears sharp and bright. "Come anyway, there's plenty worth fixing here." He promised he would. Later, when the meadow began to cast long blue shadows, Margaret found John on the porch, boots propped up, watching the sky. She joined him, the hush between them shot through with meaning. "We never needed a name," John murmured, "just a place to stand." Margaret leaned on his shoulder. "Turns out the place was always waiting for us." A car rumbled up the drive, an old red wagon, dust trailing behind. Out stepped Bate, waving a sheaf of papers. "Still working," Margaret called, smiling. Bate grinned, thrusting a file her way. "The judge signed everything. The property's yours. DA's office wanted you to have this, too." She handed over the silver badge, Margaret's father-in-law's, gleaming after a polish and set in a simple frame. "For courage," Bates said quietly, "we need reminders." Margaret ran a finger across the engraving. "He made mistakes, but tried to leave us a way out." Bates' eyes softened. "Restoration's a better legacy than revenge." The mayor had already called 3 times about the press. "Poster family for resilience." Margaret had laughed out loud. She didn't want to be a poster for anything. But the first batch of letters from veterans came anyway, hoping, asking, thanking. She read each one, thinking, there's room enough for all of us here. That evening, they lit a bonfire at the edge of the woods. Margaret's son arrived as the flames leapt high, stepping out of the car with a careful, uncertain hope. He cupped his mother's hand and held it tight. The circle around the fire grew, old friends, new volunteers, strangers, all drawn by the sense of a good thing set right. Donna passed around plates of cornbread, John poured coffee. Laughter ran under the stars, fierce and full. Even the neighbors who'd signed old petitions against them appeared with casseroles and apologies. The world was smaller here, pain and kindness passing hand to hand. Margaret looked around at the faces, her family broken and rebuilt, Donna teary with pride, Bate boots muddy from gardening. To the clatter of mugs and the snap of kindling, Margaret raised a glass. To all the things that ought to see the sun, to wounds and wrongs made right, and to the quiet work of tending what's left behind. The applause was warm, unrushed. John tugged her closer as the fire burned low. And after the crowd thinned, Margaret walked the property boundary under moonlight, thinking of the generations folded into these fields, failures, secrets, whispered jokes. The cabin was steady now. The damage and disgrace hadn't won. From the porch, John called gently, "Come inside, Mags, dawn's not far." She paused by the old foundation, rubbing her thumb over the key that started it all. For a wild moment, she wished her father-in-law could see it now, could understand how a buried truth had built something worth keeping. Inside, the kitchen hummed with comfort, soft light on painted walls, the slow settling of dust and old grief. Margaret straightened the picture of her grandfather and placed the framed badge above the mantel. She gazed at the faces, her own, John's, Donna's, even Bates', united not by perfection but by the will to outlast the storm. Outside, a train horn wailed in the night. The world spun on. Somewhere in the fields, a fox darted through grass, running roots older than any name or scandal. The wind in the trees sounded mournful, but Margaret no longer flinched at the echo. Later, lying beside John, she whispered, "Are you afraid of what's next?" His reply was muffled against her hair, "Just of missing the good that's here now." She smiled, letting her heart ache and heal at once. In the weeks that followed, the cabin became what it had always threatened to be. A crossroads, a place to patch wounds, a forge for battered spirits to make themselves useful again. The town crept toward repair. The county clerk sent word the land's old stigma had been dissolved, official, signed, complete. 3 council seats were filled by new blood, people who set their hands to fences and doorframes without asking who'd built them before. Margaret grew roses along the porch rail. She organized a library from the boxes left in the attic, and every Sunday after supper told her story to those who wanted to hear it, not as caution or legend, but as reminder. One late afternoon, as the sun cut the world into gold and shadow, Tom came to her side. He held out a thick envelope, his resume, finally putting in for a teaching job at the new local school. "Think they'd take a Winters?" he asked, nervous grin trying to hide his fear. Margaret regarded him, pride simmering. "I think they'd love nothing better." He laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound was unguarded. She watched as John and Hank Linwood cleared brush along the creek, as Donna stacked jars of jam by the door, as Bate arranged fresh paint for the dorms. None of it would make the pain of the past vanish, but it gave weight to the work of the present. When a gentle rain washed the fields a week later, Margaret pulled on her boots, tiptoed out to the edge of the woods, and let it soak her to the skin. She closed her eyes, feeling the earth's quiet forgiveness, letting go of every hurt that had driven her this far. She thought, if a place can come back, so can I. In the dark, in the softening storm, she began again. And so the cabin, at last neither curse nor joke, was simply a place full of light where anyone with a scar and a stubborn hope could come, where truths, once weapons, were rendered into wisdom, and where the ground, broken by greed, was mended year by patient year into something strong enough to stand on. Margaret smiled at the memory of cold stone beneath her fingers, the old foundation key. She understood now, some legacies are not bestowed but chosen. Some families are not inherited but remade. And sometimes, when the world offers you exile, you answer by building a home the world can't take away. She turned from the field and stepped into the glow spilling from the windows, a place made safe, if only for a little while, by the hard, lovely work of bringing the truth to light. Tom's laugh drifted through the doorway, mingling with the clink of dinner dishes and the low, familiar pitch of John's voice. Margaret lingered on the porch, drinking in the midsummer dusk as cicadas struck up their chorus in the grass. She pressed her palm to the doorframe, rough wood alive under her hand, and allowed herself a final, slow breath before returning inside. Around the kitchen table, the new family took shape, Donna and her partner elbow-deep in peeling apples, Bate pouring a second round of coffee, Hank tapping out a tune on the windowsill. Tom caught her eye, his uncertain, newly hopeful smile, and something at the core of Margaret softened and settled, as if the ache of old injuries had finally found a place to rest. John raised his mug. "We need a toast, Mags, for all of this." He gestured at the battered table, the laughter, the full plates. "We made it through." Margaret slid into her chair, touched by the ordinary beauty of clatter and warmth. "To making it through," she echoed, "but also to building forward, for every one of us who had to leave something behind just to begin again." "Here, here," Bate called, raising her cup. Donna reached across, squeezing Margaret's hand. "And to the ones who risk telling the truth," Donna added, "because it doesn't always pay, but sometimes it's enough." They drank, the silence that followed gentle and easy. Even the dog seemed to understand, curling beneath the window, tail thumping. Through the open screen, music from someone's radio wandered up from the field where neighbors loaded compost and lumber, preparing for tomorrow's planting. Margaret smiled at the faces around her, at the possibility stitched into every new day. She thought of all they had lost: certainty, safety, reputation. Yet at this table, bound by courage and forgiveness, they had everything that mattered. "Tomorrow's a big day," Tom said, eyes bright. "First work crew arrives for the new wing." Margaret met his gaze. "Then let's be ready, and let's make sure no one's ever left standing outside a locked door on our watch." Laughter answered, neatly finishing the promise. As dusk bled into night, Margaret realized the past truly had loosened its grip. The door was open, and whatever came, they would meet it together.